What would you say are the essential verities of crime fiction, if any?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Essential verities of crime fiction, three essential or four, any essential elements that you've observed in the genre over your...
What are the essential verities of crime fiction? What are the... Whatever. Well, I'm not sure there are any. I know that the best definition of crime fiction or mystery or what you will, I think is Otto Penzler's, and that's that a work of crime fiction is any work in which a crime or the threat of a crime is a central element of the story. And that's pretty broad. And one thing that has made crime fiction an area where I've been reasonably comfortable spending my life is that this is a house that contains many mansions. There aren't that many books that I could want to write that wouldn't fit into that one way or another. Verities beyond that, I don't know that there are any, and I also know that whenever anyone produces rules, they're just begging to have them shattered. S.S. Van Dyne, who wrote the Philo Vance mysteries back in the 20s, I think it was. I think it was Ogden Nash whose take on it was Philo Vance needs a kick in the pants. But the books were quite popular, and so Van Dyne figured that he was thus qualified to formulate what the rules were for detective stories. And he wrote a list of 10 or a dozen of, never do this, always do that, never do that, never do that. And Craig Rice, who wasn't going to take that kind of crap from anyone, immediately sat down and wrote a book that broke all 10 rules into just fine, so that sort of thing happens all the time. There are no rules. You make this up as you go along. Yes?
How has the business end of publishing changed from the writer's perspective over the years? For example, the establishment of advances, the receiving of royalties. Is it a constant battle even as you become established, or does it get better?
Well, as in every area of human events, nothing gets better. That's complicated. I don't know what the answer is to that. The business has changed in too many ways to enumerate. When I was starting out, which as I said was in the late 50s, there were many, many publishing houses, and they were virtually all partnerships or one-man operations. This was before the whole business became corporate, which has changed it enormously. But that's true of most American businesses, and probably most businesses globally. How has it changed it for a writer? It's never been easy to make a living as a writer. It's never been easy to make a living in any of the arts. And it probably shouldn't be, because everybody would want to do it. But, that's okay. I have a feeling there's more to your question that I'm not answering. Is there?
Well, I'm just wondering if the publishing houses have become even more, e-publishing aside, have they become more parsimonious? Or do the Stephen Kings of the world get all the money and there's none left for anybody else? Or?
First of all, it's no successful writer is taking the money away from any of the other writers. Their books are just earning it. So that's not it. I think in recent years, the market for the threshold is higher. The commercial threshold is higher. There was a time when if a book could just sell a couple thousand copies, it could be profitable. Now it can't, not on a balance sheet of a multinational corporation, because there are too many things charged against it. So that unless a book has the potential to sell more copies, they're not interested. That's why a lot of people who woke up one morning and found themselves labeled mid-list authors suddenly could no longer get published. They'd been published profitably for many years. Their sales hadn't gone down, but they were no longer profitable at that figure. So that's been a change. And it's not that anyone has gotten more parsimonious. And it's at the same time that this is happening, there are changes within publishing houses. Editors, after a certain age, are often encouraged to retire because they would rather replace them with someone who doesn't earn very much. And they're all overworked. And rarely have time or inclination, and sometimes they don't have the ability to do things that editors once did. There's very little line editing that goes on. And thus there's a new category of freelance editors who are those fine veteran editors who lost their jobs, as I just described, who now have their own business editing material for hire, so that the manuscript that you go in with is professional. An interesting thing, I was talking to a fellow who was an editor of mine many years ago, and who had been some years now in business doing this as a freelance editor. And he said that lately a majority of the books he gets are by people who intend to self-publish. And I realized just how essential a role he functions just a couple of weeks ago when an old friend sent me a manuscript. He was self-publishing a memoir of his time in the advertising and newspaper businesses. And I read it, and he's a professional writer. He's written for years. He's had any number of books published. But this was his memoir that he was just doing that. And because he was self-publishing it, he didn't have an editor. And he should have.
Oh.
Not because the sentences weren't right, not because the paragraphs weren't good. He's a good writer. But he needed someone to say, this is crap and you should leave it out. And there was a lot of crap and he didn't leave it out. You know? So while editors may not be doing as much at publishing houses as their original editing, people with that function, people have to fill that function.
Looking around. Questions? Last questions? More questions? I just wanted to ask you, though, I know that in the last couple of years you've been doing a lot of website, blogging, all these things that you had not been doing. And was it out of fun or need that you decided to do that? I mean, what possessed you
Yeah.
to do all of it?
No, it's been not that long that I've been doing that much. But maybe a year and a half, something like that I've been doing a blog and all. I don't know exactly. I felt it was probably a good idea, and I thought I would enjoy it. And I've been less active in the past couple of months, but will probably resume. It's very interesting to be living at a time when everything changes as rapidly as it does. It's quite extraordinary. I remember some years ago, maybe, well, whenever it was, I was thinking about a great aunt of mine who lived to be almost 100 and died in, I guess, the late 80s. And I thought how much change she's seen in the course of her life. There were, the automobile was essentially, didn't exist in her early childhood. And she lived into the jet age and everything else. What extraordinary change. And that's true. I think the world has changed as much in the past 20 years as it did in her lifetime, maybe more. So the rate of change is exponential. That makes it a little tricky to write contemporary stuff, and if you start worrying that it'll be out of date, because it will. Whatever you write will be out of date before it's published. So you have to just live with that. I mean, it's just the way it is. Yes?
Do you have any thoughts on how like crime fiction would be changing, given like we're now in a phase where multiple points of view is very common? The tone of authors' voices has changed over the years. Any thoughts on like what new areas are we kind of reached?
I don't know that the nature of narrative has changed much at all over the years, truth to tell. I think, experimental fiction is always something that somebody did 20 years ago and somebody else did 20 years before that. And also experimental fiction is a name you put on something no one's going to read. But as far as, viewpoint and things like this has always been around. I don't think there's that much difference. I think, you'll get, I think the one eternal verity is that all anybody cares about in crime fiction, or virtually any other kind of fiction that's written for readers, is what happens next. And if you don't write in such a manner that the reader wants to know what happens next, that's not going to work. And if the reader really does want to know what happens next, he'll forgive almost anything else. And you can see that in the books that are enormously popular and aren't really very good, because the narrative drive is sufficient to overcome a lot of defects in style and characterization and everything else. Maybe not forever. You might not want to reread the book, but there are a lot that will propel you through it. Yes?
Well then, where does the role of like your central character fit in his or her development? Because you're talking about moving what comes next, but doesn't the growth of your protagonist also
I'm
fit
sorry,
into
I'm
that?
not hearing you well.
Your protagonist, okay? Over time, he or she changes, I would think. And doesn't that propel your novel as much as what comes next? How how they develop?
No, that's part of why you care what happens.
Okay.
Are you addressing a separation between character
That's what I
and
wasn't
plot?
sure, yeah, that's where I wasn't sure if he was
Okay.
making the separation, so that's why.
Yes.
When you've written as many books as you have, does it become a job or do you still love it?
It became a job very, very early on, and the extent to which I still love it varies.
I was going to ask about the many books you've written. How are you so prolific? Do you have a way that you have worked? First of all, have you changed the way you've worked, or have you worked a certain way for many years?
Well, I think the way I work has always fluctuated and depended on circumstances and on the book and that. But one way, one explanation for the amount of work that I've done, well, there are a couple of explanations. One is that nothing I wrote ever made me rich, so I had to keep on doing. Another is that I've just been doing this for a long, long time. It's understandable that I would have produced a lot of stuff simply by putting in that many years in it. And also it's natural for me to write rapidly and to generally just write things once. It's natural for some people to write rapidly, and it's natural for some people to write slowly, and it's difficult to change from one to the other. I know Ellen Hunter was a friend of mine, and he became friendly with and had a lot of admiration for a writer named Stanley Allen. And Ellen wrote very, very slowly. He couldn't he couldn't write the second paragraph until he'd written the first paragraph so many times that it was perfect, and so on, all the way through. And he mostly wrote short stories for the longest time. He became less wedded to this pursuit of perfection when he was writing novels, as one would have to. But his short stories were wonderful, and they're still wonderful. And Evan said to him, he talked with him, and Evan decided that what he needed to do was slow down, because Evan could write a couple of books a month without really breaking a sweat. And it was natural for him to write rapidly, and he wrote very, very well. And so he decided to work at this, and he called Stanley one time, and he said, "I think this is really working. I've got myself down to 8 pages a day." And Ellen felt pretty good if he got a page a week out of it. So it was just two different kinds of writers, and there was no way either could be well advised to try to emulate the other.
Is there a last
Yes.
question, and then we'll put the air conditioners on, and we can go to buy books and have a drink.
Do you still engage with creative editors now on projects, on your fresh projects now, say as much as you may have in the past? I ask you because I've asked a number of other really successful writers at events like this, and a surprising number of them say no. That they do their books, they get to the end of the book, they hand in the book, that's the book. And I wonder if you still get a better feel for what you're doing, or a better result if you have a creative literary person discussing it?
No,
As an editor.
as hard-headed a person as I am, I've never really welcomed input. I really haven't. Occasionally I've gotten a suggestion that has struck me as a good idea, and I've taken it, though it's very difficult for me to believe that something's a good idea if I hadn't thought of it. If it was a good idea, it would have come to me. That sort of thing. But no, I don't.
Never did it in South
I don't welcome.
And yet you thought this French memoir was begging for an editor.
It was. Yeah.
Last words before we drag you in the back. A minute.
Anybody have a last question?
No, I think your last words, but
Another guy.
No.
no. Are you working on a book now?
We have a last question. No.
So